Okay, so today we're going to look at the evolution of corporate governance codes. Okay, so if you, I'm assuming that you can hear me because I'm not in the Teams platform right now. So I'm just at the end of the lecture, I'll come back there. In case there are any questions, you can post the questions at the end of the lecture. So today we're going to look at the evolution of corporate governance codes. Okay, so we need to understand the key factors affecting the development of corporate governance codes, and to be aware of the main developments in corporate governance codes. So we also have our own code in Malaysia, which is called the MCCG 2021 is the latest version. Okay, it was updated in April of this year. Okay, so that one is our own Malaysian code, MCCG, Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance. So that I will cover it separately. Today we're going to look at the codes in other jurisdictions. So we need to be aware of the corporate governance codes which have been most influential globally. Okay, these are our Malaysian code is actually derived from some of the other codes in other countries, especially in UK. And to critically assess the characteristics of corporate governance codes and the mode of operation. Some of the codes in the UK, corporate governance codes in the UK. So the first one, okay, which I think you should go and Google and do some reading on it, is the Cadbury Code. This was developed by a group team under Sir Adrian Cadbury way back in 1992. Okay, now this is one of the earliest corporate governance codes. That's why we always refer back to it. This is called the Cadbury Code. Okay, he's from the famous chocolate family, Cadbury Code, Sir Adrian Cadbury. Then after that, we had the Greenberry Report in 1995. Then we had the Hempel Report in 1998. Now, all of these three report recommendations were then combined in what was called the Combined Code in 1998. Okay, so this is something about the corporate governance in the UK. So as you can see, every 3 years, they have revised their code to update their code. In Malaysia also, every 4 years. Okay, every 4 years every 5 years. Okay, we do it every 5 years. 2002 was our first code, then 2007, then 2012, then 2017, and now we are in the 2021 code. So whenever you answer questions, make sure you refer to the latest version of the Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance, which is the 2021 version. Okay, 2021 version. As I mentioned earlier, in April of this year, the Securities Commission of Malaysia updated the MCCG. So the current version is the 2021 version, the latest version. And then in UK as well, we are still looking at the developments in the UK. They had the Turnbull Report, the first one in 1999, then in 2005, then they had the Miners Report, 2001, 2008, then they had the Hicks Report, the Smith Report. Okay, so all of these reports recommendations were largely incorporated in revisions of the Combined Code 2003, 2006, 2008. So what you can see from all this is there has been constant revision and updating. Okay, but the one that we usually refer to, because this was one of the earliest or the pioneer one, is the Cadbury Report. Cadbury Report 1992. Okay, all the others came after this Cadbury Report. This was the pioneer report in corporate governance. And then they had the Walker Review, UK Corporate Governance Code, UK Stewardship Code, and Davies Report. So as you can see, we just need to, you just get the picture of why this is so important, that every few years they come out with a review, updating, and then the new report. Okay, likewise in Malaysia, as I just said just now, our first code, the Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance, came out in 2002. Then the next one was in 2000, after 5 years, 2007, then 2012, and then 2017, and now we are in the 2021 version. Okay, so whenever you answer any questions relating to corporate governance codes in Malaysia, make sure you refer to the latest version, which I will upload on times as well. Okay. So still in the UK, recent FRC stands for Financial Reporting Council. In the UK, they have a body called the Financial Reporting Council, which is responsible for the monitoring of financial reporting of public companies, listed companies. So they have come out with some guidance on risk management, internal control, and related financial and business reporting, as well as developments in corporate governance and stewardship 2014. This is corporate governance in the UK. In addition, the Companies Act 2006, Financial Services Act Authority Review 2005, 2009, the Turner Report, Her Majesty's Treasury Report, EU directives, okay, and then not forgetting the very important one, Sarbanes-Oxley. I've mentioned this before in class. This was in response to the Enron scandal. Enron in 2002 was a very, very major corporate scandal. It involved a company in Texas, Houston, Texas, okay, which went bust. And because there was collusion between the senior management, the top management of Enron and the auditors at that time, Arthur Andersen, which was one of the biggest companies in the world, okay, but because of this scandal, the Enron scandal, this Arthur Andersen is no longer around today. You don't hear the name anymore. At that time, Arthur Andersen, I think now we're talking about Big Four. At that time in 2002, it was the Big Eight. They had the big 8 companies. Okay, so now Arthur Andersen is no longer around. As a result of this Enron scandal, which was a very, very major scandal, and we have looked at it in the tutorial and I've looked at the case study. So in the US, they passed legislation in the Congress, fast track legislation. As you know, in the US, the legislation takes a long time to pass the House of Representatives, sent to the Senate, and pass back, and ding dong, it takes time. But this one, there was unanimous support in both the House of Representatives and Senate. So this law, they call it as fast track legislation, passed through very quickly. It was promoted by two representatives, David Sarbanes and the other guy Oxley. Okay, so today this is a very important legislation. It impacts companies all over the world, especially if your company is wishing to list on the New York Stock Exchange. Okay, if it's whatever company from wherever in the world, if you want to go and list your shares in the New York Stock Exchange, which is one of the biggest stock exchanges in the world, if I'm not mistaken, the biggest stock exchange in the world. So you need to comply with this act, Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Okay, so basically this was an act passed to strengthen practice of corporate governance in the US, but it has implication all over the world. As I said, if you are a company, you want to list in the New York Stock Exchange, then you must make sure you comply with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Okay, impact of institutional investors. Now, one of the reasons this Enron is a very major scandal is because the major investor in Enron was CalPERS. CalPERS is the California State pension fund for the people, state employees in the state of California. Although California is one of the states in the US, by itself, California is the 10th largest economy in the world. If California were to separate from US today and be a country by itself, it would be the 10th largest economy in the world. So that is why it has a major impact. So the people working in the state of California, all their savings and so on, retirement fund, all got burned out. Okay, so that's why they make a lot of noise. They went to see their congressmen, congresswomen, and asked them to take some action. And they pursued this aggressively. And as a result, in the US, they passed this act called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. You just Google, you will find plenty of information about this. Most of the time, they just use the shorthand notation. It is called SOX, S-O-X, SOX. Okay, SOX refers to Sarbanes-Oxley. And the impact of institutional investors. So again, going back to the Enron case, all these things came about because of the major investor in the Enron was this CalPERS, California State Pension Fund. Okay, and so when all these people lost their money, their life savings, and so on and so forth, of course they were not happy. They lobbied their congressmen, congresswomen to take action, and they passed this fast-track legislation called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And all of their representatives have influence on UK corporate governance. Okay, this, as I mentioned just now earlier, okay, Cadbury report 1992. Why is it important? As I said, this was a committee set up in the UK, okay, to look at this aspect, to look at this corporate governance, to come out with recommendations, and this was the pioneer report. Okay, so if at all you have to quote some answers, some evidence in your answers, you can always go and refer to Cadbury report 1992, chaired by Sir Adrian Cadbury, who is a member of that famous chocolate family, the Cadbury chocolate family. Okay, so now let's look at the details of the Cadbury report. Okay, so Cadbury report, as I just said, came out in 1992. So at that time, it was mandatory. Mandatory meaning must be complied with by all listed companies in the London Stock Exchange in the UK. Again, the London Stock Exchange is also one of the biggest stock exchanges in the world, if I'm not mistaken. NYSE, New York Stock Exchange, London Stock Exchange, these are some of the biggest stock exchanges in the world. Okay, impacted the fundamental development of courts in other jurisdictions, for example, India and Russia. So meaning the other countries and other jurisdictions also, as a result of the Cadbury report in the UK, they also came out with their own codes, okay, basically largely based on the Cadbury report. Likewise in Malaysia, we are also very much, our report is very much based on the Cadbury report, which was the pioneer report in corporate governance. So what was the feature of this report? What was an important feature of this report is the use what is called a comply or explain mechanism. Comply or explain mechanism, meaning that these are the rules for companies. Okay, either you comply. If you fail to comply, you must explain why. So this is what they mean by comply or explain mechanism, in order to promote greater transparency and confidence in companies, especially listed companies. Okay, listed companies, you are holding shareholder funds from the public. Okay, so that is why they need to have confidence that you are managing their funds in the best interest of the company. Okay, which was not the case in the case of Enron. So I don't know how many of you have actually gone and read up Enron. There's pages and pages of information about Enron in the web. You can read it up and you can see that one of the major issues in the Enron case was top management, the very top management, the CFO, the CEO, and all of the top senior people, they were involved in a lot of fraud. Okay, and what made the situation worse is that they were colluding with the auditors. So if you remember my earlier lecture before the independent learning week, the week before that, one of the slides where I talked about the 3 pillars of corporate governance. Again and again I refer to that. So go back to that slide where we talked about the internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and auditors. So these are the 3 important players in corporate governance. So if any one of those pillars is weak, that is when you will have problems. That is when you will have problems in the company. Okay, but this Cadbury report is mandatory for all listed companies in the UK. So they used what is called a comply or explain mechanism, meaning that these are the rules, these are which you have to comply with. Now, if you fail to comply or you do not comply, you need to explain why you didn't comply in your report, in your annual report. Okay, so this is what they mean by comply or explain mechanism. It's all in part and parcel of promoting greater transparency and confidence in listed companies. Listed companies are companies which are quoted on the stock exchange, meaning that people have invested, public has invested, institutional investors, general public, all have invested. So they want to know that the company is being run in their best interest. But for non-listed companies, okay, this is highly recommended. It's not mandatory, but highly recommended. So that is the distinction. So if you're a listed company, if you're a quoted company, you must comply. But if you're not, it's highly recommended. Okay. So what are some of the key recommendations of this Cadbury report? So most of the recommendations are in relation to operations of the board of directors. So these are the people who are very important in corporate governance. Okay, again, I refer you back to my slide in I think it was I forgot. It was the week before the Independent Learning Week, where we looked at the main players in corporate governance. Okay, remember the 3 pillars. I strongly advise you to go and look at that slide again. Okay, so the 3 pillars are the external stakeholders, internal stakeholders, auditors. Okay, so this Cadbury report made a number of recommendations in relation to board of directors. So the first thing is establishment of the board of directors, composition, the makeup, who are the members of the board of directors, as well as the operation of key board committees. Okay, when you talk about key board committees, there are 3 main committees that we will be looking at in more detail subsequently in later weeks. This is the nomination committee, the remuneration committee, and the audit committee. Okay, we can also include the risk committee as well, but audit committee also takes care of risk. So basically 3 main committees that we are going to focus on in our lectures after this. One is the nomination committee, the other one is the remuneration committee, and then we have the audit committee. So that's the first aspect for operation of board of directors. And then the other one is the importance of non-executive directors or independent non-executive directors. So it's very important in corporate governance to have INEDs. Okay, INED stands for Independent Non-Executive Directors. They are there as watchdogs to take care of the interests of the minority shareholders and other shareholders. Okay, so if they don't play their role well, if they're negligent or they collude with the dominant directors, then that's when the company gets into all kind of problem and scandal. And then reporting and controlling mechanisms of business. So these are some of the key recommendations that were put forward in the Cadbury Report 1992, which was the pioneer in corporate governance. Okay. Then on top of that, we also have other international corporate governance influences. Have already uploaded 2 papers in week 8. I don't know how many of you have actually gone and read them. So the 2 papers that I uploaded are largely based on the OECD principle. OECD stands for Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This is an organization that is based in Europe. Okay, it is the leading economists in the world. They are members of this organization. Okay, mostly the leading industrialized Western democracies are members of the OECD, although Japan and Korea and a few other countries also members of OECD. So the OECD is a very major player as well in corporate governance, and they have developed best practices in corporate governance. Okay, so they developed international best practices corporate governance. In first one was in 1999, and then they review and updated it in 2014 after extensive consultation. And then in September 2015, they came out with their statement on G20. G20 stands for the group of 20 largest industrialized developed countries in the world. And then they came out with their OECD principles of corporate governance. So this is a very another big player in the aspect of corporate governance. So the first thing we looked at is the Cadbury report. Now this is based in UK. This one is UK one, and then now we're looking at OECD, which is basically the largest economies in the world. Okay, again, the OECD is another major player in corporate governance. So they came out with 6 principles of best practices for corporate governance. So the first principle is ensure the basis for effective corporate governance framework. Ensuring the basis for an effective corporate governance framework. So the second one is the rights and equitable treatment of shareholders and key ownership functions. So you need to ensure that you're taking care of the rights and you treat equitably, means treat fairly shareholders and key ownership functions. Institutional investors, okay, in most big companies, especially listed companies, you find the big shareholders are the institutional investors, stock markets, and other intermediaries. The role of stakeholders in corporate governance. So when we talk about corporate governance, it's not just the shareholders. It's also the other stakeholders. Okay, shareholder is one of the stakeholders. Maybe we can say they are the primary stakeholder, but they are not the only stakeholder. And then another aspect is disclosure and transparency. Very important. You need to disclose so that the stakeholders know how you are managing the company. The disclosure is done every year by means of the annual report, financial report, and there must be transparency. And last but not least, the responsibilities of the board of directors. So these were the 6 key principles of corporate governance developed by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, also known as the OECD. Okay. And on top of that, we also had other international organizations which influence the development of corporate governance. These are the big players in corporate governance. Okay, the first one is the World Bank. The World Bank is based in the Washington, D.C. Okay, this is a very important organization in the world. It's called the World Bank. Then we have the Global Corporate Governance Forums, GCGF. Then we have the International Corporate Governance Network. We have the Commonwealth Association. Commonwealth, all those countries which are colonies of Britain before, including Malaysia, they are part of this Commonwealth Association. And last but not least, you have the Basel Committee. So the Basel Committee comes out with guidance on corporate governance for banking and finance organizations. So they have certain regulations which are unique to them, which only concerns those in the banking and finance sector. So they need to comply with the guidelines developed by the Basel Committee, which is based in Switzerland. Okay, so these were some of the major players who influenced the practice of corporate governance. So just to recap, so we had looked at the first one is the Cadbury report. This was in UK. This was in UK. Then we have the OECD, another big player in corporate governance. They came out with their principles of corporate governance. Then we have other international players who influence the development of corporate governance, including people like the World Bank, Commonwealth Association for Corporate Governance, the Basel Committee. Basel Committee is specifically for those companies in the banking and finance sector. So they have come out with some guidance for companies in the banking and finance sector. And then you also have EU, European Union. Okay, European Union also came out with a lot of pronouncements and regulations in relation to corporate governance. So I'm sure by now you can see this is a very important aspect in running of companies, corporate governance. So all of these people have come out with many rules, regulations, and reports. Okay, so just to make the point that this is very important in companies. Okay, EU action plan on modernizing company law, enhancing corporate governance in the EU. EU is the European Union. It's made up of I think 27 countries. Okay, basically in the continent of Europe. UK was a member of EU until the end of last year. Since 1st January this year, they have left. You know, I'm sure you read about the Brexit. So UK has already left, but still there are 27 countries which are members of the European Union. Okay, so European Union also very important major player in corporate governance. So they came out with their pronouncements, rules, regulations. Okay, so this is another major player in corporate governance, European Union. They have come out with the green paper on corporate governance framework, action plan, European company law, corporate governance, modern legal framework, shareholder rights directive, and so on. Okay, just for you to get some idea, these are the big players in international corporate governance. And then we have already seen now UK. We started with the Cadbury report. This is in UK. Then this is the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This is another major player in corporate governance. They came out with their principles of corporate governance. Then we have other big organizations like the World Bank, IMF, and all this. Basel Committee, they also came out with their guidelines on corporate governance. And then we have the European Union also has come out with many rules, regulations talking about corporate governance. And now we look at the US. So what in US also, there has been a lot of developments in corporate governance. As you know, the US is the largest economy in the world. And they were badly hit by the Enron scandal, which was the first major scandal in 2002. Okay, so as a result of the Enron scandal, they came out with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002. So this is something important for you to keep in mind when you're doing a revision. If you just Google in the internet, you will see a lot of information about this Sarbanes-Oxley Act. and you see the New York Stock Exchange, they have their own corporate governance rules, which they update from time to time. Okay, so hopefully by the end of today, you will get to see why it's so important. Okay, why it is so important. Then we have the non-governmental organizations, the public sector, non-profit organizations, charities. There is also very important for these people, corporate governance. So there are many reports governing corporate governance in this sector. You have the Independent Commission for Good Governance in Public Services, Good Governance and Public Services, and so on and so forth. Okay, so now since we have done with this, I would probably just go back to continue with, before I go, I just want to go quickly to the Times, what do you call, Teams. If there are any questions, please ask. Okay, I'm not sure whether you were able to hear me because I didn't get any feedback from any of you. But if there are any questions, you can ask me now before I. Were you able to hear me? I didn't get any response from you guys. Can I have a quick indication in the chat area? Would you able to hear my, or was I talking to myself? Can you let me know? Okay, all right. So now I want to go and just last week, because of the IALW, we didn't have a lecture. So now I just want to look at the second part of the theoretical aspect. Okay, we didn't do it. So it's already up on Times, but I'm not sure they understand it. So I'll quickly go through it as well since we still have time. So we didn't go through these together. So since I have time, I'll just go through it today. Okay. So this is part of the corporate governance theories. Okay. The week before the Independent Learning Week, we stopped up to a point. So now I'm just continuing on from there. So transaction cost economics views the firm as a governance structure. So the choice of an appropriate governance structure can help to align the interests of directors and shareholders. So the cost of any misaligned actions can be reduced by judicious choice of governance structure. So what this statement means is that if you have the right governance structure, okay, so any misaligned, meaning actions that is not in the best interest of the company, can be reduced. We're not saying can be eliminated, definitely cannot be eliminated, as long as we have human beings running companies, and it's not robots, they're human beings. And as can be seen in the case of Enron, if they collude with auditors and others, in the best system also, we cannot stop it. Okay, but by having the right governance structure, we can minimize, or we can reduce or mitigate this from happening. So in a world of incomplete contracts, agency problem also present, governance structure can be viewed as a mechanism to make decisions specified in the initial contract. So this is what transaction cost economics is all about. Okay, so now this is a very important slide. I just spoke about just now about shareholders. Okay, shareholders, if you look at this slide, they are one of the stakeholders. Okay, you see my slide here. This is the company in the middle, then you have shareholders. So they are external stakeholders. So we have internal stakeholders in the company. Who are the internal stakeholders? The employees, the managers, the owners. These are the internal stakeholders. But we also have external stakeholders. So these are the external stakeholders, the suppliers, the society, the government, the creditors, the shareholders, customers. So all of these people are stakeholders. Stakeholders meaning they have an interest in the company. So if anything happens to the company, it is going to affect them. For example, employees. Why are employees considered as stakeholders? Because if the company goes bust, they're going to lose their job. Okay, they're going to lose their job. So they are an important stakeholder. So if they're not happy, for example, they're not happy with the company either because they're not getting what they're supposed to get, then they will not perform to their best. So we need to keep in mind, we also have internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. So society is also a stakeholder. Company is operating in society. Company is not, it's not in some desert somewhere. We are operating in society. So whatever we do has implications for the society. For example, a simple example would be if you go and pollute the air, if you pollute the rivers, okay, this is where the supply of the drinking water comes. I think we've had a few scandals recently in Malaysia whereby we had shut down, especially in Selangor, for a few times already because of pollution in the reservoir, in the water supply. So this is why I say a company has many stakeholders. Society will be affected by the actions of the company, either positively or negatively. So government is another stakeholder because they're depending on the revenue, tax revenue. If the company does well, then they will collect the tax revenues. Creditors, they have lent money to the company, and therefore they are interested in the health of the company. If the company is a healthy company, so they don't have to worry about getting back their money. Creditors, shareholders are a very important stakeholder. In fact, I would call them the primary stakeholder because it's their money. They have invested their money in the company in the hope of two things. Okay, first one is the dividend. At least the one every year to get a dividend. And over time, they expect the dividend at least maintain. If cannot maintain, must increase. That is the income stream that they hope for from company. And on top of that, they also want capital gain, meaning that if I bought this, if I invested at this price, so after 5 years or after 10 years, I want to see some capital gain in the share price. So there are two aspects for shareholders. That's why they are an important stakeholder. Okay. And last but not least, customers. Customers, they are buying the goods of this company, so they want to ensure that the company is still around. For example, if this company is manufacturing motor vehicles, okay, it doesn't mean that once you sold the car, finish, your relationship with the customer is over. No, you still need to make sure that the customer will come back to you for spare parts, for maintenance, for repair, and so on and so forth. So if you look at this slide, you'll see that these are the stakeholders. Okay, but we break them up into internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. However, in today's framework of corporate governance, they are all important. We cannot just focus on this one group and ignore the rest. So if you are a good company, okay, with a good corporate governance framework, you will note who are your stakeholders and give attention to all of them. Make sure that they are all happy. If they're happy, then you as a company can do well. Okay, keeping in mind, we are not neglecting or ignoring this shareholder group, which is a primary stakeholder. Okay, I repeat, primary stakeholder. However, they are not the only stakeholder. As you can see, we have so many stakeholders, but they are the primary stakeholder. No denying that they are the primary stakeholder because they have invested their money in the company. Okay, the reason why Sarbanes-Oxley, for example, was fast-track legislation in the US 2002 is because the shareholders lost all their money. In this case, the shareholders were the pension fund, the California State Pension Fund. So they made a lot of noise. People, when they approached their congressmen, congresswoman, they brought it up to the Congress of the US and they passed the legislation, fast-track legislation called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is a very major act in corporate governance. So any company which wishes to list their shares in the New York NYSE, New York Stock Exchange, they have to comply with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Okay. So why we bother about what's happening in New York? Because it is the biggest stock market in the world. Okay, all the big players are listed on the NYSE. All the biggest companies in the world are listed in the NYSE. Okay, now we look at another theory called the stakeholder theory. Okay, stakeholder theory says that you shouldn't just focus on one group. Okay, coming back to this slide here. Stakeholder theory says that you focus on all the stakeholders. Don't just give attention to the shareholders. Again, I'm saying the same thing. Okay, shareholders are an important stakeholder, but not the only stakeholder. So basically what this theory says is you need to take account of a wider group of constituents rather than just focusing on shareholders. So where there's an emphasis on stakeholders, then the governance structure of the company will provide for some direct representation of the stakeholder groups. Now, this is more in the continental model. We have basically two models in corporate governance. One is the Anglo-Saxon model, which we are following in Malaysia, and the other one is the continental model, which is being followed in the continent of Europe in Germany, in France, in Italy, in Belgium, and so on. So the first one, which is the Anglo-Saxon model, which is the one that we are following in Malaysia. Okay, Anglo-Saxon basically refers to the English-speaking countries, US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Malaysia, and so on and so forth. So this is the Anglo-Saxon model. The board is made up of totally of executives and non-executives employed by the shareholders. So the emphasis is on shareholders. This is the Anglo-Saxon model. The other model, which is being practiced in the Europe, continent of Europe, as I said just now, Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands, and so on. They also have representative in the board of directors, employees. Okay, they believe that they must also be on the board because they are an important stakeholder. Okay, employees are an important stakeholder. Like I said, if they are not happy with the company, they are demotivated, they will not perform to their best. So we also need to take care of the employees' interest. So these are the two major models in corporate governance. The Anglo-Saxon model, which is in the English-speaking countries, which also includes Malaysia, by the way, since we are also adopting the Anglo-Saxon model. And the other model, which is the continental model, which is in Europe, France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Italy, etc., etc. Okay, so in Europe, the continent of Europe, they believe their focus is more on the stakeholders. Okay, whereas in the Anglo-Saxon model, our emphasis is on the shareholders. Okay, so I want to repeat, in Malaysia, we are also following the Anglo-Saxon model. Okay, so it's just a comparison between the models. Okay, so basically the stakeholder model says we have to take into account the wider group, not just focus on the shareholders. Okay, stewardship theory. So this is another theory. Stewardship theory says that the shareholders and the stewards, their interests are aligned. Their interests are aligned. There's no conflict. So basically, if we look at this theory, it says that the directors are the stewards. They're taking care of the company's assets, and they will be predisposed to act in the best interest of the shareholders. So there's no mutual suspicion between the shareholder group and the stewards. Their interests are aligned. Okay, so this is the stewardship theory. It says that the directors are the stewards, meaning they take care of the company's assets, and as such, they will be predisposed to act in the best interest of the shareholders. Now, Donaldson and Davis, 1991, in their research published in 1991, they are the people who came out with this theory. Okay, because before this they came out with this theory. We were using the agency theory. Agency theory basically says you have the principal and you have the agent. So it is antagonistic kind of relationship. There's a mutual kind of a distrust. Okay, so in order to make sure that the agents are acting in the best interest of the principals are the shareholders, the agents are the board and the management. We need to keep a check on them. That's why we appoint the auditors. So auditors are there to keep a check on the board of directors and the management. Okay, go back to my earlier slide. Okay, I think you can see the flow of the arrows. I don't know how many of you have actually bothered to look at the slide. I've been saying it many times already, so I don't think I want to repeat myself. Go back and look at that slide, the three players, and then the flow of the arrows, who's responsible for what, who answers to whom. So that's the agency theory. Now this is another theory, stewardship theory, which says the shareholders and the stewards, their interests are aligned. So the shareholders empower and trust the stewards, the board of directors. Okay, you empower them, give them power, you trust them. In return, they will protect and maximize the shareholders' wealth. So this is how it goes. Okay, shareholders empower, trust the steward, and the steward will protect and maximize the shareholders' wealth. There's what we call two types of motivation: intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, meaning that the stewards are already motivated to act in the best interest of the shareholders. So you don't need to keep checking on them. You don't need to keep checking on them. Basically, if your interests are aligned, so there's no need to be worried that these people are going to take advantage of us. Because there's such a thing called information asymmetry. Information asymmetry means one party knows more than the other. And that one party that knows more than the other, when they take advantage of that gap or the difference, that's when we'll have a conflict. So that comes under agency theory. That is the other theory, but this is another theory developed by Donaldson and Davis, saying that it's not necessary to be the case all the time. So they came out with this stewardship theory. So according to the stewardship theory, if you make sure, if you empower the directors, you trust them, okay, and they are sufficiently motivated, so no need to keep checking on them by means of having audit and so on, external auditor checking on them. So they will act in the best interest of the company to protect and maximize the shareholders' wealth. So this diagram is an explanation of the stewardship theory. Class hegemony. Class hegemony says that there's a potential for gap between what the boards are expected to do and what they actually do in practice. Okay, in reality, this is what they're supposed to do, but in reality, this is what they do. There's a gap. Okay, so according to this class hegemony theory, directors view themselves as an elite at the top of the company. They look at themselves as an elite group at the top of the company, and so whenever they recruit new board members, they will recruit or promote to the new appointments to the board people who will fit in with their group. They call it in UK, they call it the old boys club. Okay, they call it the old boys club. We went to the same school, we enjoyed the same sports, we play at the same golf club, and so on and so forth. So we have our thinking is the same. Okay, they call it as a group thinking. Okay, so they prefer when they recruit new members to the board of directors, they will go for people who are similar to them. So they will recruit, promote to the board appointments, taking into account how well the new appointments will fit into their group. So that by doing so, they hope to minimize conflicts. Okay, so this is called the class hegemony theory. Now, managerial hegemony theory says that, okay, managers, okay, remember there are 3 levels. Yeah, I don't want to go back to the earlier lecture slides. I really don't have time. I'm just relying on you guys to actually go and revise, go and look at the slides. The top is we have the shareholders, okay, shareholders. Then in the middle, we have the board of directors, and right below, you have the management. Okay, if you refer back to that slide, I've been saying it many times. It's very important. The flow of the arrows, okay, which shows who answers, who is responsible for what, and who answers to whom. So under this managerial hegemony theory, the management of the company with knowledge of day-to-day operations may effectively dominate the directors, and hence influence weaken the influence of directors. Now, this is due to what we call information asymmetry. Information asymmetry means that the management, since they are involved in the operational day-to-day running of the company. Okay, remember, directors are not responsible. I repeat, not responsible for operational matters. Directors are not responsible for operational matters. It is the responsibility of the management. Directors are only doing the oversight role. They're only doing the the oversight role. They don't actually run the company. The running of company is done by the management. So because the management are involved in the day-to-day running, so they know a lot about the company, and if they choose to run the company in their best interest, take advantage of this gap there, okay, this is what we call managerial hegemony. So they will effectively dominate the director. Directors don't know what is happening, so they just depend on the managers to give them the feedback, the information. So this will weaken the influence of the directors. So if they are acting in the best interest of the company, then their interests are aligned, they are synchronous, there's no issue. The issue will only arise when they are acting in opposite direction. Managers are acting for themselves, self-interest, and they are abusing the knowledge that they have to enrich themselves, self-interest. This will weaken the influence of the director. So this is called the managerial hegemony theory. Okay. So another one is the path dependence theory. So corporate structures depend on the structures with which an economy started, may be structure driven and rule driven. So this was 2 researchers in the US, Babchuk and Rowe, made a significant contribution to the development of a theory of path dependence. So initial ownership structures can affect both the identity of the rules that would be efficient and the interest group politics that can determine which rule would actually be chosen. This is called the path dependence theory. So resource dependence theory says that directors connect the company to the resources needed to achieve corporate objectives. So resource dependence theory has implications for various key areas, including the optimal structure of organizations, as well as the recruitment of new board members and employees. So this is another theory called the resource dependence theory. Institutional theory says that institutional environment influences societal beliefs and practices, which impact on various actors within society. So different countries, different cultures may react differently to the same challenge or event. This is called the institutional theory. Political theory significantly influences ownership and governance structures, including, among other things, inter alia means amongst other things, the impact of the government, the law, justice system, etc. on society. So Rowe made a significant contribution to the development of this theory, political theory. Then the next theory is called the network governance theory. So a structure of network governance will allow for superior risk management. So these three gentlemen contributed to the development of this network governance, which can be seen as a logical way to extend the science of cybernetics, which is the control of any system using technology, to organizations. Aspects include organic and more informal structures and processes rather than a rigid bureaucratic approach. And last but not least, talking about culture, I think we have spoken about this at length in previous lectures. So a focus on culture and its impact on the development of corporate governance theory and practice is gaining prominence. Lately, we see a lot of research papers looking at the impact of culture on the development of corporate governance. So an appropriate corporate culture will have to ensure integrity within the company and should limit dysfunctional and dishonest behavior, which is detrimental to the company shareholders and other stakeholders, and the environment within which the company operates. Then now this is getting more and more popular these days, culture-based governance. So market-based governance mechanisms are necessary, but instilling the right culture to support corporate governance is essential. So culture-based governance comprises the governance culture. Corporate integrity sets the moral tone for governance and accountability. So the governance culture refers to the statements, visions, slogans, values, role models, and social rituals that are unique to and used by a multinational company. MNC is multinational company, board members, and key executives. This is called culture-based governance. So with that, I've come to the end of the. This was supposed to be done in the Independent Learning Week, but since we didn't do it, so I thought I might as well do it today. Okay. So basically today we have covered two weeks lectures. Okay, so I'll go back to the chat area. Any questions either from the lecture 7 or lecture 8 which I covered today, please ask today. Okay, in the meantime I'll just go and get your attendance. We'll share the code with you. So any questions, either you can unmute and speak up, or else you can what shall I say, you can put your question in the chat area. I'll try and answer your questions. Please ask. We're already now in week 9. Okay, I think you can see the code here. All right, if you cannot see, I'll share it in the chat area. Can you quickly do your attendance on the camps? Okay, so CBCYU5. CBC capital letter. CBCYU5. Please do your attendance before the screen closes. So in the meantime, if there are any questions, please post it in the chat area, otherwise unmute and ask me. So as I said, for today's session, I have covered the week lecture 7 and lecture 8. Any questions related to either of the two lectures, you can ask me today now. We still have about less than about 10 minutes. Okay, so make sure you are familiar with okay. So again, just quickly go through some of the slides which are important. Okay, so this one is the important slide, slide 2. Okay, slide 2. Who are the stakeholders? Stakeholder theory. This is important. This is important. Stakeholder theory, stewardship theory is important. Okay, class hegemony. You need to know what is class hegemony, what is meant by managerial hegemony. Okay, this one all not so okay. Resource dependence. What is resource dependence? Institutional theory. And then you have your political theory, you have your network, you have the last but not least culture. Lately, these days, culture is getting more and more important in corporate governance. So focus on culture and its impact on the development of corporate governance theory and practice is gaining prominence. Why? Because an appropriate culture will help to ensure integrity within the company and should limit or minimize dysfunctional and dishonest behavior which is detrimental to the company, its shareholders and other stakeholders and the environment in which it operates. Okay, so culture is gaining more and more importance in corporate governance. Okay, so basically you need to be familiar with the stakeholder theory, stewardship theory. These are the stakeholders. Like I said, and then in the earlier previous week I talked about some of the agency theory. So these are some of the theories in corporate governance. So again, in lecture 8, we looked at some of the codes, okay, the important codes, the most important codes, okay, the one that I stressed is Cadbury code. Why is it important? Because it was one of the pioneer in corporate governance. Way back in 1992, Cadbury, so focus on this one. Focus on the Cadbury report, okay, Cadbury report, and then the OECD 6 principles, the 6 principles of OECD corporate governance. Also focus on this one. Okay, then we other players are European Union, World Bank, Basel Committee, which came out with guidelines for the banking and finance. And the US one, you look at the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This was in response to the Enron scandal, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was developed in response to the Enron scandal, which is a very major scandal. Okay. All right. So basically that's it. Okay. So if there are no further questions, then I guess I will be exiting shortly. If you have any questions, please ask.
Hi, sir.
Yes.
Do we have to turn it in our individual assignment?
Yeah, you do.
Have you opened
I haven't done it. I will. You still have time, right? 20 seconds, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do it. I will do it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Are there any questions in relation to today's lecture? Basically, that's what I want to know.